Привет.
Видел эту машину на Авито, 0 ДТП. И у этой тоже. А у этой еще и владелец хороший.
На Авито самый большой выбор машин в России. Найдите лучшую, проверив в автотипе.
Do you write code? Tab 9 will speed up your coding process. Using artificial intelligence, Tab 9 predicts your next move while keeping your code neat, smart, and safe. Tab 9. Write less. Code more.
20. Exacto. No, детская радость.
Hi, I'm Dave. Мне как раз для тебя есть подарок. Да пустяки. Держи, открывай. Это 3 бесплатных урока английского языка, на которых ты узнаешь больше, чем за все 11 лет школы. Прямо на них ты можешь исправить свои...
October, I became a bit obsessed with ferrofluid, and I really wanted to try making it myself. So I looked online and I found a bunch of different procedures, and it seemed to be quite straightforward. However, when I tried them, none of them seemed to work. When a ferrofluid goes near a magnet, or just a magnetic field in general, it should easily form these weird-looking spikes, and it should also still look like a fluid. What I made, though, either just didn't do much of anything, or it partially solidified and formed these semi-solid spikes. I actually thought that this was still kind of cool, but it was far from being a proper ferrofluid. Not being able to make it, and the fact that there was no decent recipe for it anywhere, honestly really frustrated me. So, I kind of went into full tryhard mode, and I started reading every piece of relevant information that I could find. Then, I just started trying different things, and about a month later, I was eventually successful. I was actually able to make some really nice ferrofluid, and it spiked even better than the commercial stuff. For my last video, I had to buy the ferrofluid to get this shot, but this time, this is the stuff that I made. With a side-by-side comparison, you can see that the spikes in mine are actually sharper and bigger. When it comes to making ferrofluid, the general idea is quite simple. It's basically just a stable suspension of a magnetic iron compound in a solvent. In practice, though, it's a bit harder, and it's not as simple as just mixing these two things together. The magnetic iron compound, which is usually magnetite, has to first be specially prepared as nanoparticles, and then chemically coated with something to make them stable. So the question now is, how did I do it? And well, that's kind of the point of this video. I'm going to be showing you guys exactly what I did, and the first step was to make the magnetite.
Яндекс, самая большая компания на рынке СНГ, придумала, как умножить капитал жить.
To do this, I needed a source of iron 3+ and iron 2+ ions. In my last video, I used ferric chloride that I made for the iron 3+ and ferrous sulfate that I bought for the iron 2+. However, this really wasn't the best way to do it. Preparing both of them myself requires a lot of time and effort, and neither of them end up being super pure. I found that it was way easier and cheaper to just use circuit board etchant. This stuff is really easy to get, and I picked up 4 liters of it from a local store for only about $50. It's about 40% ferric chloride, aka iron 3 chloride, and I used it directly as my iron 3+ source. To get the iron 2+, though, I had to make it myself from the 3+ etchant, but it was quite easy. All I had to do was reduce these 3+ ions to 2+ ions using steel wool. So into a beaker, I poured in some of the ferric chloride, and I also dumped in some steel wool. It started reacting almost immediately, and the iron 3 was being reduced to iron 2. In doing so, 2 iron 3 ions were turning into 3 iron 2 ions, which meant that the concentration was increasing. A lot of procedures that I saw online, though, didn't take this at all into account, and they assumed that the concentration was staying the same. However, in the end, I was going to have 1.5 times more iron 2 ions than the iron 3 that I started with, and this was very important to be aware of. This is because later on, when I make the magnetite, I'm going to have to mix the iron 2 solution that I made with more iron 3, and the ratio between the two is very important. Messing this up, especially by a huge factor like 1.5, would definitely lead to poor quality magnetite and ruin the whole preparation. This process was exothermic, meaning it released heat, and because of this, the solution slowly heated up. This extra heat was actually a good thing, though, because it caused the reaction to go a lot faster. Over the course of just several minutes, the dark red-orange color from the iron 3 slowly disappeared, and it started turning green from all the iron 2. The basic idea here was to keep adding the wool until it pretty much stopped reacting, and then to just let it sit there for a bit. I came back about 10 minutes later, and now the green color was getting a lot more obvious. All I did was just stir it around, and then I let it sit for something like another 30 minutes. By now, it looked like the red-orange color was pretty much all gone, and it was probably getting close to being done. However, I wanted to be really sure that there was no iron 3 left, so I let it sit overnight. This was what I had in the morning, and it wasn't exactly beautiful. There was still a lot of steel wool left, but there was also this whitish green solid that had formed, which I think was just iron 2 chloride. I'm guessing there just wasn't enough water to dissolve it all, and it started precipitating out. This was of course quite easy to fix though, and I just added some more distilled water. I mixed it around as thoroughly as I could, and then like before, I just let it sit around for a bit. It eventually separated, and I saw that I had this really nice green solution, and now the next step was to get rid of all this extra junk. I did this by just passing it all through a regular coffee filter, and I drained it directly into the bottle that I was going to store it in. When everything had filtered through, I washed the beaker, the steel wool in the filter, and the filter itself with a bunch of distilled water. When I was done doing that, I took away the funnel, and I topped everything off with more distilled water until I got to the level that I pre-marked on the bottle. This gave me a total volume of about 300 milliliters, and it let me calculate the relative concentration of this new iron 2 solution. For those that are interested, I've included all of the calculations that I did here, along with some extra details. But anyway, after this, I dropped in some iron nails. This iron 2 solution is easily oxidized back to iron 3 just by oxygen in the air. However, when these nails are added, it can reduce things back to being iron 2. At this point though, the iron 2 solution was ready, and I could now actually get things started. In my last video, I used my hot plate to stir things, but I found that it wasn't nearly fast or strong enough, especially to do it on larger scales. So I went and bought a nice overhead mixer from Amazon, which was basically just a high-tech milkshake maker. Also from eBay, I picked up a cheap Teflon-covered stir rod. Okay, so now equipment-wise I was all set up, but to actually make the magnetite, I just needed one other ingredient. This was concentrated ammonia solution, which is usually around 28%, and I picked up mine online. Now to get things started, I filled up this container with about 3 liters of distilled water, and I turned on some weak stirring. Then I added 60 ml of the iron 2 solution, followed by 75 ml of the iron 3, and I let it stir for another 10 minutes. During this time, I set up an addition funnel, and I filled it with about 100 grams of the concentrated ammonia. Also, you can see here that at this point, the RPM of the mixer was at 463. When the 10 minutes were up, I increased the stirring to about 1200, and I opened the addition funnel. Almost immediately, it formed a bunch of dark solid, but the mixer quickly scattered it, and it disappeared. As more was added though, it started sticking around, and the whole thing eventually turned brown. This was because when the basic ammonia was added, the pH slowly increased. When it got to above around 4, it started reacting with the iron 3 ions to make brown and insoluble iron 3 hydroxide. As more ammonia was added, the iron 3 ions were all eventually converted, and the pH continued to increase. When it got to around 9, it started converting the iron 2 ions to iron 2 hydroxide, but these didn't exist for very long. Almost immediately after forming, they combined with the iron 3 hydroxide to make black magnetite. Now, if all I wanted to do was make some generic magnetite, I wouldn't have needed this whole setup. I could have just directly mixed my iron 2 and iron 3, and even without stirring, dumped in the ammonia. The reason that I did it this way though, was because I needed the magnetite to form as nanoparticles. This part of the process was surprisingly finicky though, and I found that even just small changes in things like stir speed, or how fast I added the base, could really affect the final result. In general, I wanted to stir it as fast as I possibly could, because as the stir rate increases, particle size tends to decrease. However, the faster I stirred it, the more air got mixed into the reaction, which caused more iron 2 to get oxidized to iron 3. This altered the ratio of iron 3 to iron 2, and if this wasn't accounted for, the quality of the magnetite would be affected. For magnetite, the perfect ratio between iron 3 and iron 2 is 2 to 1. What I did instead though was use a lot more iron 2, and I added it as a ratio of 1.7 to 1. This way, when it oxidized and became iron 3, it would then be able to just combine with some of the excess iron 2. This gave me a bit of a buffer zone, and it allowed the reaction to be a lot more tolerant to oxygen. However, when the reaction was done, I also didn't want excess iron 2 still floating around. The speed that I added the base at also affected particle size, but this too was dependent on the stir rate. A faster addition could lead to smaller particles. However, if the stirring weren't fast enough, it could cause larger ones to form instead. So basically, if I stirred it too quickly, I might get too much oxidation, but if I stirred it too slowly, the particle size might become too big. On top of this, there were other variables, like how much extra water I had to include in this reaction, and things like temperature, and I had to find a balance between all these factors. It's definitely still far from perfect, but what I found worked was to do it at room temperature, with about a 20 times dilution, a stir rate of about 1200 like I said before, and to add the base over the course of 20 minutes. Adding the base did cause the mixture to slowly thicken though, so over the course of this, I slowly increased the stir rate to around 1500. So 20 minutes later, I was done adding all the ammonia, and then I let it stir for another 15 minutes. While I was waiting though, I prepared the solution that I would use to stabilize the nanoparticles. This was done using
Меньше чем через 24 часа у вас на счету будет $1000, а потом $1000 в день на протяжении всей жизни. Всего за 5 минут. Множество людей уже проверили этот метод, и он на 100% безопасен. Сейчас я покажу вам, чего смогли добиться те, кто только вчера присоединился к моей команде. Каждый заработал больше $1000, даже лучше. Средний доход составил в районе 2100.
using oleic acid, which I got from eBay, as well as some more of the concentrated ammonia solution. So into a beaker, I added about 15 grams of oleic acid, followed by 20 mils of water and 10 mils of the ammonia. Almost immediately, the ammonia reacted with the oleic acid to form a soap called ammonium oleate.
Так это же не лепо, что ты говоришь?
I stirred this around until it became a nice and thick goo, and it was
А, то есть ты
basically
вот так
ready.
будешь. Ты будешь делать, что хочешь, потом станешь, что ты станешь. Ничего ты не станешь, просто ты будешь, ну, тебе
It had
присядок
almost just been 15 minutes. I went back to the reaction, and I filled the addition funnel with 15 grams more of the concentrated ammonia. All of this ammonia was quickly added, within about a minute. And when it was done, I checked the pH, and I saw that it was nice and basic, probably just below 10. I then took away the funnel, and I dumped in all of the soap that I had just made. It has a tendency to get stuck inside the beaker though, so to get it all out, I had to wash it.
Наверное, нет, просто наоборот, так это. А, ну да. Ну ладно, ну да. Ну да, есть. Да, да, да. Не понимаю. Крутяк. Ну нет, ну. А, это узор, что ли, он там показал? Или этаж? Шинербин, наверное. Да, это похоже. Ну, наоборот. Ну, вот это самое. Ну да, это есть на самом деле. Люкс, люкс. Ну да, так это есть. Ну да. Ну, самый разный.